Hi everyone, thank you guys so much for joining us. I have the pleasure of introducing our exhibiting artist, Werner Sun. He is in Gallery Julius, as you see right here. He's part of our CNY Emerging Artists series. And the idea behind this series is selecting an artist that really understood the context in exhibiting within sort of this like white box gallery, contemporary gallery versus next door at the Cayuga Museum, a historical home in its historical context. So the CNY Emerging Artists is a collaborative partnership between the Schweinfurth Art Center and the Cayuga Museum right next door. So Werner will be giving his talk here. He'll be speaking about his series here, and then once he's finished, we will all move together to next door, and we'll take a look at his two series within the two galleries over at the Cayuga Museum. I do want to note that Werner was selected out of 51 applications, so we are really, really excited to have him, and he's been such a pleasure. So please give me a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. So my name is Werner Sun. I am an artist who works across several different media, including digital images, paper engineering and folding, drawing and painting. My work is both analog and digital. It straddles the line between two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And I make these image-based objects that you see on the wall here. And I call these sculpted prints. So what you're looking at is a digital print that I have cut up and folded and glued into this three-dimensional pattern, and then it's mounted on top of another print that was left. And to really appreciate these sculpted prints, you kind of have to move from side to side and allow the viewing experience to unfold in a gradual way. So in this exhibition, I am showing 3 different series across the 3 galleries in the 2 buildings. This work all spans a period of 7 years. So for me, it's like a mini retrospective. And that is the origin of the name of the show, How Did We Get Here? I will go through the series in chronological order. So this is the first series, and it's called Double Vision. But first, a little bit about me. I'm an artist with a scientific background. After college, I went to grad school in particle physics, and I ended up doing my graduate research at the particle collider that's at Cornell University. After I got my degree, I decided to stay on to continue my research, and eventually I took a position as the IT director of the lab. So these days I'm more involved in scientific computing rather than particle physics. Even though science was and is a big part of my life, I was never able to focus on just one thing. And so I've always had one foot in the arts, one foot in the sciences. And my art is an attempt to bridge these 2 worlds that I inherit. Because on the one hand, I am drawn to the sense of order and elegance that you see in math and science. But on the other hand, I feel that math and science don't fully address the complexities and the messiness of human existence. And so, I mean, as you can see, I do use patterns in my work as a nod to my scientific background. But what I tend to do, I tend to layer the patterns so densely that they generate their own sense of complexity. It's like I'm trying to create my own worlds to study. So these are a few consistent themes in my work: pattern, complexity, seeing, and sense-making. How complex systems can emerge from simple ingredients, and how we try to make sense of them, how we try to understand them. So even though I have a scientific background, my work is not about specific concepts in science or math. I'm not trying to illustrate or explain anything. I'm just playing with my visual materials the same way I played with data as a scientist. So what my work is about is perception and knowledge, how scientists view the world in general, how they look at information through many different kinds of lenses in order to figure out how the world works. So this idea of lenses is most apparent in this series here, called Double Vision. And as I said, this is the first series that I'm going to talk about. It was made in 2018 and 2019. Most of the works in this series are diptychs, two panels, where one of them is folded, the other is unfolded. And this construction with the two panels refers to our binocular vision, and it creates this stereoscopic effect where, as if you're seeing something different with each of your eyes, and your mind is trying to resolve it. The panels that I use, they tend to have different depths within each diptych, and I also bring the images up on the sides to emphasize their sculptural qualities. The images themselves are actually photographs based on photographs of folded paper. So these are, in a way, they're self-referential works because I'm using photographs of paper sculptures in order to make other new paper sculptures. So I brought a few examples to show you. So this one here, this is actually the first one I made in the series, is based on a photograph of this. So if you look at it from the side like this, you get the image that is printed. The one over here is a photograph of this little thing. Again, look at it from a landscape angle, and then I play around with it, and that makes this image here. So often the thing that I'm photographing is much smaller than the actual piece, and so not only, these also act like microscopes in a way. The one right behind Maria is actually this little, folded piece of paper, and you can even see the edges of the paper in some parts of the work. So the other thing that I do with the images is I play around with symmetry. What I do, I take a photograph, I flip it around in Photoshop, and I overlay it on itself, so it's got a line of symmetry with the same thing on both sides. Even though I'm using symmetry, I often subvert that symmetry by moving the line of symmetry off to one side. The one back there, that's way on the end, that actually is the two panels are mirror images of each other. So there, the line of symmetry is right down the middle between the two panels. But again, I'm subverting that because one of them is folded, the other is not. So what I'm really trying to capture, I think, in the series is that moment in time where you've seen something with your eyes, but your brain hasn't fully processed it yet. You're still trying to make sense of what you've seen. And the geometric folds are a representation of that processing because they are algorithmic manipulations of the image, just like you would do in Photoshop or you would get with a lens, except instead of manipulating pixels or rays of light, I'm actually manipulating the paper that the image is printed on. So the folding, what does that do to an image? So here, I have two identical prints that were identical, and I folded one, and so you can see what happens. So the folds, they distort the image. They compress it by 1/3 in the horizontal direction, and 1/6 of it gets discarded. And so the pattern itself is called the snub square, SNUB, and it's made of triangles and squares, and it's got 2 triangles for every square, and 5 shapes that meet at every point. And the way I make this work, but I start out with an image that is something like this, and I divide it into a square grid. And then 2/3 of the squares in the grid get marked with X's, and those are the ones that are going to get folded into pyramids to make this pattern. And the way that works, it's actually a very simple operation. So starting with the square, I score on the diagonals to make an X. I cut one of the legs of the X's, so I get these 2 flaps, and I just tuck one flap under the other, and that forces the center to pop out into a pyramid. And so this is the basic vocabulary that I have to work with, squares and triangles. So in order to make this pattern, I figured out, as you can see, a way to do the folding while keeping the image intact. So again, this is scored on the back along the square grid. It's scored on the front along those diagonals, these diagonals. And then I've peeled off the parts of the print that are going to get folded under. And so one by one, these pyramids get made. And when that's done, I don't want to exclude. When that gets done, this becomes this. So the pattern here, I really think of it as, well, it's a controlled form of wrinkling the paper. And it's also an emergent phenomenon because I'm really doing a very simple operation over and over again. But in the end, the cumulative effect of that is this interesting pattern. So that's another common theme in my work, is that I'm always trying to do a lot with a little. I try to challenge myself to use a limited vocabulary and see what I can do with it. And it's this, you see the same thing with the way I use folded paper in order to make other works with folded paper. And that's what this sort of self-reference gives you. It allows you to do a lot with just a little bit. And so in general, I think there's really this interplay between pattern and complexity, because you can describe something that's complex using the language of pattern, like we do in science. And that gives you this superficial sense of order, you know, that's represented by my folds. But there's no free lunch. That order comes at a price. And in this case, it makes the image actually more complex. Folding makes the image more complex. And I think you see this in many fields of learning, that the ideas and concepts that we use to explain the world can generate their own complexity. So there's this trade-off where we exchange one kind of complexity for another. And over time, I've come to realize that that is really the central idea that I'm saying with in my work. So hello, welcome back. This is the second of the 3 series that I am showing. And the work in this room is called Big Bang. This is my pandemic series. I started this work at the beginning of the pandemic. And as you can see, compared to the Double Vision series next door, it's much more agitated. I was trying to channel the chaos and the claustrophobia that we all experienced during the lockdown. And the images are based on photographs of a glitching computer monitor. So I just had this broken monitor from work. It was flashing, the pixels were flashing in all sorts of different ways, and I just took photographs of it. And you see the results of it here. So one thing that I do a lot in my work, I use this technique that's called recursion. And recursion is you take an object and you perform the same action on it over and over again. So that what you get in the end is just the accumulated effect of all those repeated transformations. You got a taste of that action in the Double Vision series, where I used photographs of folded paper to make other sculptures of folded paper. Here, the recursion is in the images themselves. So I take a photograph and I place copies of it within itself, so they recede into the distance and give you this sort of Hall of Mirrors effect. And that zooming action is actually the origin of the main Big Bang. So the Big Bang is the explosion at the beginning of time that gave birth to the universe. Everything in the universe has been flying apart from each other since then. So when we all went into lockdown, I got this image of all of us flying apart from each other, going into our homes. And the only way we could keep in touch with each other was through our computers, through our screens. And so the zooming effect refers to the way we flew apart from each other. But the pixels, the glitchy pixels, for me are emblematic of the way our communications were just all mixed up during that time. And so here, I'm going to show you a little bit behind the curtain how I make this image. So this is one of the photographs I decided to start with. It's taken at an angle. And so the first thing I did, I distorted it into a trapezoid to make all the pixels in the image line up on a square grid. But what this does, it leaves these empty corners. So how do I fill those corners? So I carved out a rectangle from the center, and I expanded that to fill the frame. And then to make the original trapezoid stand out, I reversed the image. Now, since I've taken something out, I can put it back in, but this time with the trapezoid. And so this trapezoid then gives me another place to put in another copy. And I can do that over and over again.
Wow, cool.
And so this image, I printed it out and I started folding it. So this is very similar to the sample I showed you over there. This is the print. It's been scored on the front and the back. It's got the triangles peeled off where I'm going to glue it. And then once it's done gluing, this is what it looks like. And so I took this folded piece and mounted it back on top of the original image. So that's like the last step in this recursion, and that is this piece here. And if you come up and look afterwards, you'll see that I also brought the images onto the sides, like with the double vision. This is a second photograph that I turned into this image here. So this image, I folded it into this piece here. And now I'm going to show you recursion in a different way. So I took this photograph and I ran it through some image processing software that I wrote that flips rows and columns of pixels at random to make this image here. And I used this image to make this piece, which is in the hallway just around the corner, as well as the piece that's next to it. And I also made some three-dimensional pieces out of the same images, all the images in the series. So if you map out the relationships of the works in this sequence, you get this sort of family tree, all of which originate from this one place, this photograph that I decided to start with. And so this reminds me, just to get a little philosophical, this reminds me of something that the artist Saul LeWitt said in his sentences on conceptual art, that irrational thoughts should be followed absolutely and logically. So in this case, the irrational thought that I had was the initial decision to use this photograph. But once I made that decision, I have to follow the work where it takes me. And it can go off in many different directions. And I find that there's a lot of play that's involved in this process. And so this also reminds me of this quote by Johann Huizinga. He's a historian. Play is irrational. Play is irrational. So I think of making art, doing science, doing math. These are all forms of serious play that start off by having an idea and then following it wherever it takes you. This is the third of the three series that I'm showing. It is called Rose Window, and this is work from the last few years. And with this series, I am taking that idea of recursion even further, because this whole series is generated recursively from a single starting point. Instead of going between images and objects like I showed you next door, here I'm throwing into the mix these paintings, these drawings that are kind of calligraphic and gestural. And I find that these drawings have made the work more improvisational, more intimate, more personal, because to make each single piece, I am reacting to my materials in real time. So really, more than any other work that I've done, I think of these pieces as like diagrams or recordings of my creative process. And they are documents that that are artifacts of what I'm doing. So the way this series started doesn't look like it, right? So I started with this diagram of the snub square pattern that I use in my folds. And there's this cool thing that happens if you take the centers of all the cells and you join them together. You get the second pattern that was hidden within the first. And it's called the chiropentagonal tiling. So the snub square tiling and the chiropentagonal tiling are partners. So I took this diagram of the chiropentagonal tiling and I made this digital composition out of it. And so this is the starting point, and you'll see how, of the work in the series. I adopted the color as a theme, and that's where the name Rose Window comes from. Also the transparent layers, which remind me of stained glass. You can see bits of this image up there in this hanging piece here. And I use this image, this is the first move, to make this piece here. And here is a photograph of that piece from the side. And I used this photograph and turned it into this digital composition. I printed this out. I added drawings and collage on top. These are the triangles that I've peeled off. And here's another version, another digital composition using that same image, but with broader strokes in the drawings. And I use this to make this piece here, which is right behind me. Perfect. At this point, I felt that the work was getting a little muddy, a little self-contained. So I decided to bring in some external elements, going to Peter's question. So I photographed this piece, propped it up against a patch of sky. And that gave me this photograph. And I printed this out and added paintings and drawing on top. To continue with the natural elements, I thought I would combine this with this landscape photograph. And I thought I would actually literally weave the two prints together. But this time I said, let me see what that looks like beforehand. And it turns out, and this is what it would look like if they were interwoven. But I said, oh, this is a square grid. My folds start with a square grid. I could fold this the same way as my other pieces. And so that's what happens when you do that. And then this I mounted on top of the original landscape photograph and became that piece there. This is a close-up of that piece from the side that I printed out and painted on. And that got woven into the center of this piece here. This one's not in the show, as well as this one. But then I took a recursion again. I took a close-up of this and added paintings on top. And these made their way into the center of this piece here, right there. Going back to this photograph, this became the basis of the diptych. That's right there. And this is maybe the most complex of the pieces in this series. It's got many different layers of images, many different kinds of drawings and paintings, and it's spread out across 2 panels. The hanging elements come from a show, an installation I did called Pieces of Sky. This is in collaboration with my friend Mauro Caria, who lives in Detroit. There are a lot more hanging pieces here in the show, but they all used images from the 3 series that I've shown you today: Double Vision, Big Bang, and Rose Window. And it's a fun game if you want to try and figure out what comes from where. I really think of the work as the entire process. It's much more of a performance for me. It's like a performance that stretches across many years. And the individual pieces that you happen to see are just snapshots taken along the way. So I'd like to finish by bringing science and math back in. So as I've been showing you, I've been making art with these dense layers of images that hopefully invite you into a process of discovery and a process of conversation with them. And I think that's exactly what unites art and science and math. That they all involve a process of discovery. With science and math, we're learning about the natural world. With art, we're learning about ourselves. The way I make art is just like doing science, doing math, in that they're grounded in facts and materials, the materials we've been given. And these are the irrational starting points that have to be followed absolutely and logically, the way Salvo would say. But the thing with discovery is that there's no way you can figure out everything all at once. It takes time and effort to construct our understanding of the world. And often this happens in a recursive way, in an iterative way. It's done layer by layer, where every layer depends on all the layers that came before it. And so my work is full of layers, because our knowledge of the world is full of layers. And using this layered approach means that the process is never complete. So we cannot rely on any single system of knowledge to give us all the answers. We need these multiple systems that complement each other, like art and science and math. Systems that fit together like mosaic pieces, even if it's in an imperfect way, because they help to fill in each other's gaps. They allow us to build up a bigger picture of the world, a little bit at a time, piece by piece by piece. Thank you.